Alright, Federal Register, National Archive Records Administration, 1985, Wednesday, January 14, 2009, Part 2, Securities Exchange Commission, Title 17 Cfrr, Part 210, 211, and all, Modernization Oil Gas Reporting Final Rule. Alright, introduction, background. On June 26, 2008, the Commission issued the proper proposing release, seeking the public comment. Proposed amendment of the disclosure requirements regarding oil and gas companies with the proposal encompassed of the issue that were previously addressed with the more generally concept of the relief the Commission issued December 12, 2007. The concept release, which elicited comments with possible revisions of the oil and gas reserves disclosure requirements specified in the Rule 410 Regulation SX7, Item 102 S Regulation XK8. Proposing release is contained with a proposal not addressed with the concept release related with the update and codified with the Industrial Guide 2. We initially adopted oil and gas disclosure requirements of 1978 and 1982. Since the time there has been significant change in the oil and gas industry markets, including with the technology advances, change with the type of the project, with the oil and the gas company investment, their capital prior to issuance of the concept relief, the proposing relief, the making many industries participants express concern with that our disclosure rules are no longer in alignment with the current industry practice, therefore will limit usefulness to the market investors. Then it goes in Part B, issuances, concept reliefs. Concept of the release is just the potential implication of the quality assurance of the quality accuracy of the reliability of oil gas disclosure if the Commission were to revise the definition proposed for reservoirs and our rules, particularly with the criteria used to assess or quantify with the resource classified as preserved reservoir or as proved reserves. Expand on the categories of resources that must be disclosed to the Commission, found with including the resource of the other proved reserves. In addition, for the concept relief, the question whether our revised disclosure rules should be modeled within any particular resource classification framework currently being used within the oil and gas industry, we ask how many revised disclosure rules could be flexible enough to address the future technology innovation change for the oil and gas industry. For the concept sought further comment on whether the Commission should require the independent third-party assessment of the reserves estimate that the company include the filings. In the response to the concept relief, the commenters submitted to 80 comment letters with the receipt of the comment letters variety of the industry participants, such as the accounting firms, engineering, consultant firms, domestic and foreign oil, gas companies, federal government agencies, individuals, law firms, professional association, public interest groups, rating agencies. Consider these comments to address many of the issues in proposing releases. See overview of the comment letters received on proposing release. The proposing release sought significantly more detailed comment issue related to the concept release as well as the proposed amendment of the disclosure items of the rule of the Industry Guide 2, with the response to the proposing release received 65 comment letters, again with a variety of the constitutes with the interest of the oil and gas industry disclosure. Almost all of the commenters support with some form of the version current oil with the gas disclosure requirements, particularly given the length of the time of the lapse since the requirements were initially adopted. Commenters provided significantly more detailed comments with the proposing relief than the concept release did not include with the specific proposed regulatory text. We discussed those comments with the detail relevant and specific sections of the release. However, in general, the commenters focused on several key issues raised by proposing release. The issues included but not included the following: proposal to limit disclosure probable of the possible reserves, the proposed use of average historical prices to represent existing economic conditions to determine the economic productivity of the oil and gas reserve disclosure purpose, continuing to use single day year end prices to determine economic productivity reserve. The accounting purpose of the proposed inclusion bitumen, oil shales, and other resources with the definition of oil gas producing activities. Proposed providing provisions of the writing with the type of the technology for the company may use to establish reserve the estimates and categories. The proposed change of the definition proposed provided undeveloped reservoir reserves to eliminate the certainty requirement. The increased detail of the disclosure would be regardless of the result of the proposed definition of the geographic location. 2. Revisions addition of the definition section Rule 4 through 10 of the Regulation S through X introduction. The revision additional of the definition section Rule 4 through 10A of the regulations S through X update with the reservoir definition reflect with the change of the oil with the gas industry market with the new technology with the current and decades since the current rules adopted many of the common definitions with the design to be consistent with the Petroleum Resource Management System or PRMS, among other things with the revision of the definition addressing four issues that have been in particular interest as to the company investor with the security analysis. The use of single-day year-end of the pricing to determine the economic productivity of the reserve, the exclusion activities related with the extraction of the bitumen of the national non-traditional resources from the definition of oil and gas producing activity, the limitation regarding the type of the technology oil and gas companies may rely upon and establish levels of certainty required to classify the reserves, and the limitation of current rule for the permanent oil and gas companies is disclosed only with the approved reserves, the revision of the addition of the Rule 4 through 10 definition addition, an attempt for the address of the issue without a sacrificing clarity with the comparability with the which provided protection and transparency with the investor with the addition of the extent of the appropriate will be revised or proposed with the final definition more consistent with the term of the definition of the PRMS to improve the compliance with the understanding of our new rules. B. Pricing mechanism of the oil and gas reservoir estimation. 12 months average price. The final rule defines the term of proposed approved oil and gas reserve within part with the quantity of the oil and gas which as an analysis of geoscience with the engineering data can be estimated with the responsible certainty for the economically producible from a given date forward for the known reservoir under the existing economic conditions, operating method, and government relations, private with the right of the operate expire prior to the time of the contract, providing with the right to operate expire unless evidence indicate that the renewal reasonable certain regardless for the will of the determination for the probabilistic method used as estimation. Definition state with the economic productivity of the reservoir must be based with existing economic conditions, specifically with the calculating economic producibility. A company must have 12-month average price calculated unweighted arithmetic average of the first day of the month price for each of the month within the 12-month period prior to the end of the reporting period. Unless prices are defined with the contractual arrangements excluding escalation based on the future conditions, most commenters supported the use of the 12 months average price to serve as the proxy for the existing economic conditions to determine the economic productivity of the reservoirs reserves. Some noted that the 12-month average price considered to reflect current economic conditions of the PRS or Petroleum Resource Management System. They noted the use of the average price would be reduced effect with the short-term volatility and seasonality while maintaining comparable disclosure among companies. Some serve the commenters of the 7th commenter of the use of the first run of the price, 10 of the proposed use of the end of the month price of the use of the first run of the prices would provide companies with more time to estimate their reservoir, but they would then thought with the price better with the reflect with the actual gas price received with the typical natural gas contracts. Virtually 6 commenters recommended the use of the 12-month daily average price because they thought with the daily average price would be more appropriate within the monthly average price. But the commenters know that the oil sale contracts often are based on the daily average. The 2 commenters expressed the concern with the end of the month price if it's not representative of the actual price because the committed money traders often clear their books at the end of the month. One commenter opposed the use of the average price, saying conceptual with the use of the average price is poor regulatory policy may encourage the market pressure for the standard setters for the use of the historic average prices for financial instruments over the asset with the liability associated with the volatile markets. Noted volatility reflects underlying economics of the oil and gas industry. The objective of the reserve estimation provided with the public comparable to the information about the volumes does not favor the value. Company reserve is available to enable the investors to compare with the business prospect with the different companies for the use of the 12-month average historic price for the determination of the economic producibility of the reserve quantities and the comparability between companies of oil and gas reserve the disclosure with mitigation any additional variable within a single day price may have the one reserve estimates for although oil and gas themselves are subject to the market-based volatility. The estimation of reserve quantities based on any historical price assumption determines that those reserve the quantities of the oil and gas already has been produced, even though that they have not and the measure for the do not attempt to portray with a reflection of the fair value, but the object for the reserve the disclosure would provide with a fair value information for value. We believe pricing shift that incorporates assumptions about the estimated future market price cost that they relate with the extraction could make with the appropriate basis for estimation, or to prevent discuss with the more consistent with the objective of the comparable with the amendment that state with existing economic condition for the determining of the economic producibility of oil and gas reserves, including 12-month average price, calculated unweighted arithmetic average of the first day of the month price for each each month within a 12-month period prior to the end of the reporting period. For example, company while reporting year ended December 31st would determine if the reserve estimates for the annual report based on the average of the price for the oil for the gas the first day every month of January through December. Therefore, the use of the 12-month average price provided the company with the ability to efficiently prepare useful the reserve information without sacrifice for the objective of the comparable. Believe the revised definition of the term proved oil gas reserves will be provided. Investors will improve the reserve information hereby enhancing their ability to analyze the disclosure. R2 price used for disclosure and accounting purposes for the proposal resolved with a significant comment was used for the 12-month average price for the estimated reserve of the disclosure pressure purpose of the single day of the year end price for accounting purposes. All commenters addressing the issue view the different privately determined reserves for the disclosure of the accounting approach for the proposal. We are not to adapt the aspect of the proposal instead of revising both of our disclosure rules are on our full cost accounting rules related to the oil and gas reserve of the single price based on 12-month average. We also will continue to communicate with the FASB, the staff to align with the accounting standards with these rules. Commenters pointed out that the use of the two different prices for the disclosure accounting purposes could confuse the investors. Other use of the financial statement create misleading information, harm comparability, decrease transparency, increase costs, or burden significantly increase complexity. Disclosure, double record keeping burden require more disclosure, explain what the difference in reserve estimates, and break the connection between the disclosure and accounting. Some commenters noted that disclosure accounting rules guidance does not affect, does not use the different pricing method, in other situations. In addition, several of the commenters believe that the change of the use for the average price estimates proved reserves would minimal impact with the depreciation net income. We believe that the change of the rules use the 12-month average price and reserve estimation is not inconsistent with the principle objective of the final reporting authority for the accounting guidance with respect to the accounting pronouncements that they currently make with the reinforce the single day of the market regime with respect to the oil and gas reserve. We are communicating with the FASB staff of the line that's changed with the U in the pronouncement within 12-month average base U with the new rules. Several comments recommended to discuss in more detail. We are adopting compliance for date with the provide with the sufficient time to coordinate with the activities with the FASB. However, we discover that our revisions with the FASB will consider the will of the delay with the compliance date further. 3. Alternating price scheme. Some comment of the proposal release believe the oil and gas future price for the management forecast for the future price would be better present with the value of the reserves and be better with the line with the fair value of the reserves. The indicator of the management use of the future price with the not historical price with the planning of the day-to-day decision make with the suggestion of the use of the future price with the combined with the disclosure of the how of the management made estimate provide greater transparency compatibility with the disclosure. One note of the historical price of the little to do with the company's future investment and the value with another competent note with the differential of the calculated for the established accounting procedure under SFAS 157. However, the other comments argue with the future price that's not available to all reserves locations, and that applying different differential to price would be required subject to the estimates reduce the comparable among companies if the two commoners know but the standard price is not consistently available in some of the geographical regions. Similarly, two of the commoners were concerned that the future price of the estimates would have to be accompanied by the estimate of the futures cost. While they thought with the very subject but non-comparable to determine the future economic conditions, one commentator served the the future price with the required with the competitive with the document assumption with the future cost for the else with the disclosure would be very inconsistent among reporting companies. 3 commenters believe that the future prices are more with the subject of the market perceptions than market realities or in self-them view of the actual physical trading of the oil and gas. We share with the concerns made with the comment with the determination expected with the future price could require a simple estimation which could fall into the wide albeit reasonable range. For example, the main situation part of the world natural gas is sold through long-term contracts where observed with the market input that's not widely available. As a result, it could be less comparable among different companies depending on their different assumptions which inherit with the determine the future price. The difference assumption between the companies produce comparable reserves and information between the companies. Believe that the purpose of the disclosing a reserve estimate, providing investor information, but both meaning and comparable the reserve estimates with the disclosure rules. However, they're not designed to be, not intended to represent an estimation of fair market value reserve. Rather, the reserve of the disclosure are intended to provide investors with an indication of the relative quantity of the reserve likely to be extracted in the future. Use the methodology of the minimizing use of the time reserve specific specific variables by eliminating assumptions underlying with the pricing variable with the historically priced method would do, but the investors are capable compare reserve estimates where differences are driven in primary reserves, specifically the information, the location of the reservoir grade of the underlying resources, recognized the engineering market with continuing to develop. Therefore, we're not adopting the rule that requires companies for the future of the price to estimate the reserves at this time. Alright, 4. Time period over which the average price is to be calculated. Numerous commenters of the proposing release recommended 12-month period be with the calculate the average price for the estimating reservoirs not coincide with the fiscal year with the proposed, with most of these commented with the recommended 12-month period running from the beginning of the fourth quarter of the prior to the fiscal year with the end of the third quarter with the present with the fiscal year with the each with the company with the fiscal year with the end of the December 31st with the relevant 12-month period with which span with the October 1st with the prior to September 30th of the fiscal year with coverage with the annual report. Some of the commenters suggested that we provide a 2-month buffer between the end of the management period and end of the company's fiscal year with the reserve estimates would be based on the price from November 1st to October 31st for the company for the fiscal year for the ending of the December 31st. Commenters attributed the need for the buffer periods for the accelerated filing date for the annual reports date with the expected the additional time would result with a better, very accurate disclosure of the other noted with the same agreements, like with the production sharing contracts of other complex concession agreements can make calculations difficult. One commenter noted the shifting of the relevant message period so at the end of the 3 months prior to the fiscal year with the end would align economically typical calculation typically occur at the end of the third quarter. As noted above, we consider that all of the recommendations we are adopting the price formula based on the average price of the beginning of each month of the 12-month period prior to the end of the reporting period. None of the commenters believe that the use of the first month prices essentially would provide companies with the formal or the prepared reserve disclosures while still aligning time period fiscal year with the agree with the comment of such average will provide with the companies more time to prepare more accurate disclosure while still tying the formula to the period pricing formula to the period covered with the annual report. C. Extraction, bitumen, and other non-traditional resource with the definition of oil and gas producing activities. On current definition, oil and gas producing activities explicitly exclude the source of the oil and gas from the non-traditional, unconventional source of the source of the involved with the extraction. That means the other than traditional oil, gas, well, these other sources include bitumen and extract with the oil sands as well as the oil and the gas extract with the coals and shale, even though some of the resources are sometimes extracted through wells as opposed to the mining strip of the process they have with the such sources are inclusively provided with the energy resource of the world due to the end part of the advancement extraction of the proposing process technology. Therefore, the rules would adapt the revive the definition of oil and gas produced the activities to include such activities. All commenters with an issue supported include the extraction of unconventional resource of the oil and the gas producing activity. They believe such the inclusion would greatly improve the quality of the completeness of the disclosure. 8 commenters know that the inclusion would be better aligned with the disclosure of the way of the company's view of their operation. Some know that although the distinction was reasonable decades ago, the traditional resources dominated oil and gas production. The reality of the day of the unconventional resources are mainstream companies invest significant amount of the capital to develop these resources. The revised definition of oil and gas producing activities we developed the day would include the extraction of the non-traditional resources developed and described above with this amendment intended to shift the form of the definition of oil and gas producing activities found with the product of such activity regardless of the extraction technology. Even the amended with the definition states specifically with the oil and gas producing activities include the extraction of salable hydrocarbons and solid liquids, gaseous state oil, sand, shales, coal beds, or other non-renewable natural resources which are intended to be upgraded to synthetic oil or gas activities undertaken from the view of extraction. Currently, 2 types of the natural of the resource with the unique problem in establishing oil and gas reserve of the coal with less of the degree of the oil shale are used to both the direct fuel as feedstock to be converted with the oil and gas. And the response with the request with the comment with how best with these resources with the comment is recommended that the extraction of the coal oil shale be characterized based on the final product. With the one commenter note that the investment decision based on the value of the disposition of the final product. We agree with the commenters have provided a proposal to require the company to include the coal and oil shale that intend to be converted into the oil and gas or oil gas reservoirs. The adopted rules, however, prohibit a company that include coal and oil shale that not intended to be converted into the oil and gas as oil and gas reserves. Part 2. Disclosure of the final products. Propose the disclosure of the reserve of the organized base for the pre-process resource of the extracted of the ground. For example, the end of the proposal for the company with the extract of the bitumen and process of the bitumen In synthetic crude oil, it has its own processing plant, would have to have the base of the reservoir disclosure for the amount with the bitumen with the economic liberty for the not take into account with the economic with the processing plant. Proposal is consistent with the traditional separation upstream of the activities of the drilling, producing oil, gas, and downstream activities of the refining, distinguishing between traditional resource of the unconventional resource of the significant industrial of the unconventional resource that often involve significantly different economic and company resource within oil and gas with the traditional well. Several of the commenters disagreed. The proposal recommendation with the determining factor that should be the final with the product believe that the company should be able to conserve the price of the self-processed resources with estimating oil and gas reserves because of the economic of the processing plant critical with the registration evaluation of the economic productivity of the resource of the one commenter with the conservative distinguished bitumen with the other intermediate product from the traditional oil and gas grade with the false misleading sense of comparability because producers of the upgrade bitumen with the self-synthetic crude and self-synthetic crude do not face the same the risk of the rewards as do the producers who sell bitumen itself. We are persuaded by the commenters, however, we believe the distinction between the company of the traditional and unconventional activities is important. One over any of the investor perspective, many of the unconventional activities are costlier and therefore they have much higher threshold for the economic productivity. Therefore, we are revising proposed table in item 1202, requiring separation revised based on the final product with the distinction between final product with the traditional oil and gas, final product synthetic oil and gas. We believe that the separate disclosure investors will be able to identify the resources and projects to produce the synthetic oil gas that would be more sensitive to the economic condition for the other resource. The addition of the proposed, we're amending the definition of oil and gas producing activities to include activity relating processing of the upgrading of natural resources from synthetic oil oil and gas can be extracted. However, the definition would continue to exclude transportating, refining, processing, other field processing gas, extracting liquid hydrocarbons by company, upgrading a natural resource extracted by the company, other oil and gas, synthetic oil of the gas, or marketing oil and gas, the production of the natural resource of the other oil and natural resources from which synthetic oil gas can be extracted, the production of the geothermal steam. Proved oil and gas reserve. The significant revised of the definition proved oil and gas reserve. The adoption of the definition substantially are proposed. However, the noted above that we have to discuss the base of the price for the use of the estimate economic productivity with the average price during 12-month period prior to the ending of the day with the period covered by the report. Determined unweighted arithmetic average first day of the month period of each of the month within such a period. One commenter recommended against using the average price to calculate existing economic conditions if the price was set with the contractual arrangements. We agree with under the circumstance with the appropriate prices to the established economic producibility is the price set by those contractual agreements. Therefore, we are revised the definition to reflect the situation. The existing definition of the term proved oil and gas reserves incorporates certain specific concepts of the lowest known hydrocarbons, the limits of the company ability to claim the proved reservoir, absence of the information, fluid context, and a well penetration notwithstanding with the existing other engineering and geoscientific evidence. We propose revision of the definition would be permit the use of the new reliable technology to establish reasonable certainty approved reservoir reserves. The proved revisions of the definition of the proved oil gas reserves also include provisions of establishing the lowest level of known hydrocarbon to highest number of the oil through reliable technology over the well penetration. We are adopting those revisions proposed. We are adopting and propose the revision permanent company to claim the provide reserves beyond the development spacing area that are immediately adjacent to the development spacing area in the company with established reasonably certainty that the reserve their economic producibility. These revisions are designed to permit the use of the alternative technology established provide with the reserve required for the company to do a specific test. Use specifically test in addition to the establishing uniform standards for the reasonably certain that apply to all the provided reserves regardless of the location or the distance for the producing well. Reasonable certainty, where existing definition of the proof of the oil gas reserves of the definition for the term we are adopting with the relief that relying on the term reasonable certainty, which provides previously not defined in Rule 4 through 10 with the proposing relief. The proposed definition term reasonable certainty is more likely to be achieved than not with the move of the avoid ambiguity of the term meaning. However, several commenters recommended that the rules prior to the petroleum reserve management system definition more closely. 4 commenters with the concern of the different definition definition from the Petroleum Reserve Management System would cause confusion. The recommended use of the Petroleum Reserve Management System standard high degree of confidence of the quality of the will be recovered. One commenter recommended that because of the proposed definition is new, the Commission should adopt the safe harbor to avoid potential uncertainty until the court interprets in the phrase, but the other believe the proposed definition is consistent with the Petroleum Reserve Management System definition. One commenter opinion of the concept of the estimated whole recovery is appropriate to establish to provide oil gas reserves. We believe that the term of the high degree confidence from the Petroleum Reserve Management System is much more likely to be achieved than not in our proposal to have the same. Meaning one proposed language with the intent of the change of the level of certainty required with established reasonable certainty. However, that we agree with the terminology for the consistent Petroleum Reserve Management System will assist understanding of the term. Therefore, we are adopting with a high degree of the confidence standard that exists in the Petroleum Reserve Management System. We also will clarify that having a high degree of confidence means the quantity of the much more likely to be achieved than not, with the change of the due to the increase of availability, geoscience, geological, geophysical, geochemical engineering, economic data made an estimated ultimate recovery, with which time reasonably certain estimated ultimate recovery is much more likely to increase or remain consistent with the decrease to the provided elaboration of the definition of reasonable certainty. We're adopting the definition of reasonable certainty with address of the permanence both the use of both of the domestic method and probabilistic method of estimating reserves as proposed with the 9 commandments over the permitting of the determined methods of the probabilistic method. One commenter believed that each of the method may be more appropriate of a different situation. However, the commenter support of the proposed alignment with the definition of the term definition of the Petroleum Reserve Management System definition. Definition we're adopting states for the determined methods of the use of the reasonable certainty means the high degree of confidence of the quantities that will be recovered. Consistent with Petroleum Reserve Management System definition, probabilistic methods are used that they should be at least 90% probability that the quantities actually recovered will equally exceed the estimate. If developers are undeveloped oil and the gas reserves. We proved to provide the definition of oil with the term provided the developed oil and the gas reserve the provided undeveloped oil gas reserve with one commenter note with the term of developed and undeveloped are not restrictive of the provided oil gas reserve but could apply to classification of the reserves including probable and possible reservoirs. We agree with that commenter, although with the developer prospect with the provide with the company with the more information data with the determining reserve amounts more with the accurate the company may estimate with the provided probable possible volumes regardless of the development and state of the past for the terms we are linked with the concept of the provided reserve because of the disclosure rules permitted disclosure only the approved reservoirs and in the light of our reservoir revision to all of the disclosure probable and possible reserves. Final rule to define the terms of the developed oil gas reserve with the undeveloped oil gas reserve to indicate the developed status for the reserve and relevant to all classification of oil and gas reserves. 3. Developed oil gas reserve. Other than the change discussed above the terminated proof from the term being defined, we are adopting all of the definition of developed oil gas reserves substantially are proposed. We are to propose to define the term proved developed oil gas reserves as provided proved reserves that and projects extract oil gas through wells that can be expected to recover through the existing well with existing equipment and operating methods, and project extract the oil gas in other ways that can be expected to recover through the extraction technology installed operational time with a reserve estimate. 2 commenters suggest that consistent with the Petroleum Reserve Management System, reserves should be considered the developed if the cost of any of the acquired equipment is relative to minor compared with the cost of the new well or as installed with equipment. Again, we agree with the consistent with the Petroleum Reserve Management System and improve the compliance with our rule of addition such the provision consistent with our existing definition of the term proved undeveloped reserves, which include the reserve of which wells exist but with a relatively major expenditure is required with recompletion. Therefore, final rules provide the reserves also developed if the cost of any of the required equipment is relatively minor compared to the cost of a new well. Alright, 2. Undeveloped oil gas reserve. The proposing release will be the proposal to revive the definition of the approved undeveloped oil gas reserve with the most significant aspect of the proposal, the provision replacement with existing certainty with tests of the air with beyond one offsetting drilling unit with a productive well with reasonable certainty with the test for the certainty currently with the definition for the term proved undeveloped reserve with over the reasonable certainty standard for the reserve of the drilling unit immediately with adjacent the drilling unit with the containment of the producing well with the uncertainty standard for the reserve of the drilling unit with the beyond with the immediate adjacent recent drilling units. All commenters on this issue with this report with the proposal. The three commenters know that the single standard responsible certainty should apply to all proof of the reserves which are of adopting their aspect of the definition proposed. Many of the commenters oppose the proposed language that would have them impose the 5-year limit of the maintaining undeveloped reservoirs unless the unusual circumstance exists of the assertive that the large project of the remote area of the project with the continuous accumulation such as oil sands typically take more than 5 years to develop, but they do not view the rest of the project as unusual. With one commenter know that the proposed rule is not consistent with the petroleum reserve management system, which one term is a specific circumstance rather than unusual circumstances. Other commenters suggest that we require the company to explain why it has not developed any of the undeveloped reserves for more than 5 years. The intent proposal will not exclude the project, but typically take more than 5 years to develop, being considered the reserves. Review of the rule should allow the recognition of the reserves of the project, which are expected to run more than 5 years, regardless of whether the unusual circumstances exist. Therefore, we have provided the rule to replace the term unusual with the term specific. We note that the proposed item in 1203, regulation SK through the K, required disclosure regarding which the undeveloped reserves have not been developed. Alright, we also propose the broadening of the definition from the term proved undeveloped reserve the permit of the company to include the undeveloped reserve estimate of the quantities of the oil that the recovered through the improved recovery project to expand with the technology of the company can use the established reserves under existing definition. Company can include such quantities of the only technique have been provided effective within the actual production of the project in an area within the same reservoir, and propose we are expanding with the definition for the term undeveloped oil gas reserves to permit that use the techniques that will have been proved effective for the actual production for the project in the same reservoir or analogous reservoir or by other evidence, but use a reliable technology to establish reasonable certainty. We are also making other less substantial revision of the definition of undeveloped oil gas reserve. The first comment suggests that we use the first term to develop the spacing or draining areas instead of the drilling units because of the term of the drilling units is only the relevant jurisdiction when they establish such units. They noted that many foreign jurisdictions do not establish such units. We concur with commenters that have replaced the term drilling units with the term development spacing areas. One commenter promoted if the petroleum reserve management system guidance for the use of the analog for improved recovery projects is not limited to within the immediate area. Recommended that we delete the phrase with the definition 116. Again, we agree with the consistency with the petroleum reserve management system would be beneficial in this instance and have deleted that phrase. From the definition, we also have eliminated 2 paragraphs of the proposed definition because they were largely repetitive. The other aspects of the definition were unnecessary. RG, reliable technology, definition for the term reliable technology, adopting substantial proof of the new definition reliable technology, brought in with the technique of the technology for the company may use the established reserve of the estimates for the category. All commenters of the topic support of the principle-based definition for reliable technology. Current rules limit you for the alternative technology based for the term of the company reservoir of the disclosure. For example, the current rule of the company must see with the actual production flow test to meet with a reasonable certainty, serum necessary to establish the provide status of its reserve, similar to the current rule to provide brighter line tests, determine fluid contacts such as lowest known hydrocarbon to highest known oil, which establishes the volume of hydrocarbons in place. We recognize that the technology heavily developed will continue to develop, improving the quality of the information can be obtained from existing tests. Creative entirely new with the test that cannot envision with us. New definition for the term reliable technology permits the use of the technology, including with the computational method that has been filed with the tested, demonstrated consistent with the repeatability of the information in the formation being evaluated or in an analogous formation. This new standard will permit the use of the new technology with the combination technologies. One for the company can establish a document with the reliability with the technology of the combination with the technologies. Alright, we're adopting the certain revision for the other proposed definition for the term reliable technology. The purpose for the would require reliable technology widely accepted. However, some of the commenters were concerned that requirement would exclude the proprietary technology for the company to develop internally that have the proven and reliable. We concur with the commenters have the remove the widely accepted requirement from the final rule. We also propose to define the term reliable technology expressed within the probabilistic terms and the technology that have been proven empirically to leave the correct conclusion in 90% or more of the application. Several commenters expressed the concern that their proposed 90% threshold would be difficult to verify with the supporting on an ongoing basis. With the degree of the bright line test would be difficult to apply with a particular technology with a mixed technology to determine their reliability. Therefore, we are not adopting a 90% threshold as part of the definition. Two disclosures of the technology. The proposal will have to require the company to disclose the technology with establish reserve of the estimate of the category of material property for the company first filing with the commission of the material addition with the reserve estimate of the subsequent filings because under the proposal, company would be able to select with the technology and mix with the technology with the even established reserve of the comment. Two members support with the proposal because they believe that the disclosure of the technology uses reasonable if the definition of reliable technology principle based. However, many of the other comments were concerned the proposed requirements for the disclosure of the technology with the established level of certainty of the reserve estimates would lead to the very complex technical disclosure that would have little meaning of the investors. Others were concerned with that disclosure of the technology with a mix of technology might cause competitive harm. As an alternative, some of the commenters recommended the rule requirement a more general overview of the technology where clarifying the required disclosure would be limited with a concise summary of the technology to create the estimate. Company would not be required to discover the proprietary technologies or a proprietary mix of the technologies at a level specifically that would cause competitive harm rather than the disclosure may be more general. For example, the company may discover the combination systematic data interpretation, interpretation, wireline formation test, geophysical logs, core data, calculate the reserve estimates as noted. However, the commission staff at this part of the review of the comment process, any move may continue with the request. Companies will provide supplemental data consistent with the current practice, which for the new rules may include with the information sufficient to support companies' conclusion that either the technology make the technology with the established reserves meets the definition of reliable technology. Two commented that supported the proposal to limit the disclosure of technology to establish reserves in the company's first filing with the company's material with addition to the reserve that we are adopting with the limitation as proposed if the company has not previously disclosed reserve estimates in a filing with the commission or disclosing material with addition to the reserve estimates for the company must disclose the technologies to establish the appropriate level of the certainty of the reserve estimates from the material properties that include the total reserve disclosed in the particular property do not need to be identified. We believe that they require such disclosure when reserves are material of additional reserve that are reported for the first time with the discouraged use of the questionable technology to establish reserves. However, that we do not believe it necessary to require of the company to disclose the technology or technologies relied upon and established reserve previously. Disclosures under the rules permitted with the technology have to be unlimited with the permanent. Those permitted by our existing rules. In addition, we believe that ongoing disclosure of the technology that you've established all of the company's reserves will become unnecessarily cumbersome. Alright, H, unproved reserve, probable reserve, and possible reserves. Discussed more fully in the section 4B3 with the releasing, addressing of the disclosure requirements for the new part, subpart 1200. We are adopting the pros for the permit disclosure for the probable, for the possible, the reserve. Therefore, we're adopting the pro of the definition of the term probable reserve as and possible reserves are produced. When producing an estimate of the amount of the oil gas of the recovery of a particular reservoir and a company with make three types of estimates: an estimate on the reasonable certainty of the estimate of the likely not to be achieved, an estimate more likely to be, but only under more favorably circumstances than are likely. There are three types of estimates known in the industry: one proved, two proved by plus probable, and three proved plus probable plus possible reserves estimates. Probable reserves. We're adopting the definition of the probable reserve of the shape of the probable reserves are the totals of the additional reserve of the less certainty of the recovery than proposed proved reserve, but which in some of the proved reserves are likely not to be recovered. This is the definition provided with the guidance for the use of both deterministic probabilistic method. The definition clarified with the deterministic method used and likely not the actual remaining quantity of the recovered will equal. You see the sum of the estimated proved the plus the probable reserve similarly there with the probabilistic when there must be at least 50% probability that actual quantities recovered will be equal and exceed the proved plus the probable. The reserve estimation definition derived from the petroleum reserve management system definition for the term of the probable reserve. Several comments agreed. The proposed definition of the term is noting that is roughly consistent with the petroleum reserve management system. 2. Possible reserves. We are adopting with the definition of the term possible reserve of the proposed with the new definition, say with the possible reserve of the include, though the additional reserve of the less certain to be recovered than probable reserves. Clarifies that when the determined method that are used for the total quantities ultimately recovered from the project have a low probability to conceive of the sum of the root of the probable and possible reserves. When probabilistic method is used, there must be at least 10% of the probability with the actual quantities recovered will equal and exceed the sum of the proved probability possible estimates. Some of the comment of the proposed definition for the term possible reserves it wasn't consistent with the petroleum reserve management system, which all uses 10% threshold. The comment recommended with the threshold for the possible reserve should be 25% likelihood recovered with those percentages would become meaningful within 10%. Believe that a definition consistent with the petroleum reserve management system will provide the most certainty with the clarity with the company's investors. 2. The reserves. Reserves. Proposed addition definition for the term of the reserve of the rule of the proposed definition would have the describe the criteria for the accumulation of oil, gas, or leave of the substance must satisfy to be considered reserves. Any classification any classification, including non-technical criteria such as legal rights. Specifically, we approve the define reserves as estimated remaining quantities of oil and gas related substance that are anticipated to be recoverable as of the given date. Application development projects of the known accumulations based on analysis of the geoscience engineering data use of the reliable technology, legal right to produce, installed means for the delivering of the oil and gas related substance of the market with a permanent fence of financing, appropriate level of certainty, reasonable certainty is likely not and possible, unlikely due to, so the economic productivity of the current price and cost. Proposed definition also would have clarified the reserve as proposed, the proved, probable, and possible, according to the degree of uncertainty associated with the estimates. We are not adopting with the definition as proposed. 4. Commenters recommended with the clarification of the term legal right to produce the extent of the beyond with the initial term of the oil gas concession. There's reasonable expectation that the concession will be renewed, consistent with the petroleum reserve management system. Current staff position adopting with the definition for the term of the reserve of the most closely paired with the petroleum reserve management system definition for the term. Our final rule is defined with the term reserve of the estimated remaining quantities of the oil and gas related with substance anticipated the economic producibility of a given date with the application development projects known with the accumulation. In addition, that there must be a reasonable expectation that there will exist legal right to produce revenue and interest in the production of oil gas instead of means of delivering oil gas or related substances to the market. All permits and financing required to implement the project. And note, the definition clarified the reserve should not be assigned to adjacent reservoirs isolated by major potential sealing faults until those of the reservoirs are penetrated. Evaluated economically producibility for the reserve should not be assigned to the areas that are clearly separated from known accumulation or by non-productive reservoir absent of the reservoir, structurally low reservoir, or negative test results. Such areas may contain prospective reservoirs, potentially recoverable resources from an undiscovered accumulations. One note difference between our final definition reserves and the petroleum reserve management system definitions are definitions based on economic productivity rather than commerciality. One of the commenters believe that the reserve must be commercial as stated with the petroleum reserve management system definition. However, the commerciality entries for the subject aspect of the price of the established existing economic conditions by factoring in rate of return required by a particular company before it will commit the resources to the project. This rate of return will vary among the companies, reducing comparability among the disclosure. Therefore, adopted definition terms reserve relies on economic productivity as proposed. Alright, other supporting terms and definition. We are approved with the defined several of the other terms probably with the clarify the definition from the key terms, adopting most of them, the supporting definition discussed in a few of the detail below. Deterministic estimate. The company derived with the two different of the type of the reserve estimate, but depending on the one of the method calculate the estimate, the two type of the estimates are known with the deterministic element, probabilistic estimate, and then the proposing relief of the proposal defined with the term deterministic estimate, with this estimated based on a single value of each parameter from geoscience with engineering economic data in which reserves calculation that is used at the end of the reserve estimation procedure. We are adopting when the definition is proved. Probabilistic estimate. When adopting the new definition, probabilistic estimate is substantial with the proposal of the new rule with the defined with the term probabilistic estimate that obtain full range of value that could reasonably occur with the unknown with the parameter with the geocycle with the engineering data you would generate with the full range probable outcomes of the associated probabilities occurrence response to comment received, however, the revised the definition so that it does not include the application for the range of value with the response respect to the economic conditions because of the condition such as private the cost on the base of the historical data therefore and or established value with rather than the range of the estimated values. Analogous reservoir, we prove the definition for the term of the analogous formation of the intermediate area with the notice of the receipt of the comment indicating that the use of the appropriate analog should not be limited to the intermediate area, limited to the immediate area in which the reserve is being estimated. Therefore, we change the definition of the analogous reservoir in addition, based on the commenter of the remark with the defining with the term analogous reservoir of the man with a more consistent with petroleum reserve management system, which addresses more specifically the type of the reservoir that may be used with the analog with the definition of the type of the analog reservoir. State of the analogous reservoirs is used in similar in resource assessment have similar rock with fluid properties, reserve conditions, depth and temperature of the pressure driving mechanism, but are typically at a more advanced state of the development than reservoir as interest that may provide with the concept of the specific interpretation, more limited data estimation, recovery when used to support provide reserve in an analogous reservoir refer to the reserve of the share of the following characteristics of the reserve of interest, same geological formation but not necessarily the pressure communication with the reservoir of interest, same environmental disposition, similar geological structure, same driven mechanism. As proposed with the definition of the included with the instruction clarify the reservoir properties must be with aggregate with no more than variability analog with the time in the reservoir with the interest of the new definition clarifies off that the analogous reservoir must be with the same geological formation as the reservoir of the interest. He not to be in the pressure communication within the reservoir of the interest. Definition of other terms we received no comment with regarding to serve the proposed the supporting definition they adopting with the definition substantial as approved with the material changes. They include the following terms: condensate with the development project, economic producibility, estimated ultimate recovery, exploratory well, extension well, resources. The supporting terms of the definition are based on similar terms of the petroleum reserve management system. The definition resources based on the Canadian Oil and Gas Evaluation Handbook with a proposing relief will solicit the comment with whether we should adopt any of the supporting definitions of the commentary and submitted in an appendix to the later containing with the numerous of the other term that they thought whether would have should adopt it, decide whether not to adopt the additional decision because we feel that they have it necessary at the time. However, we decided to adopt the definition for the term bitumen. We believe that providing the definition for the term will leave the more consistent with among the disclosure because there currently are several competing definitions for the term and used in the industry, with the defining of the term bitumen as petroleum in solid, semi-solid state, natural deposit with a natural state, with it usually contains sulfur metals and the other non-hydrocarbons. Bitumen has viscosity greater than 10,000 centiposios measuring the original temperature with the deposit of the atmospheric pressure on gas-free basis. Of the definition similar with the petroleum reserve management definition with the natural bitumen. Alright, 5. Proposed terms of the definition not adopted. Proposed the definition for the term to continue with the accumulation for the conventional accumulations of the company with the disclosed aggregated reserve base for the two type of the accumulation note with elsewhere within this release. Final rules do not require the disclosure based on the type of the accumulation in which the reserve is found. Therefore, there is not need to define the terms and we are not adopting proposed definition. Similar, we propose the definition for the term sedimentary basin because it would have been part of the defined with the term by geographical area noted elsewhere within the release as we have substantially revived the definition of the term geographical area with the term in the sedimentary basin is no longer needed, so we are not adopting this proposed term of the definition. As noted above, one commenter recommended we adopt the large glossary term of the definition for the corresponding with the petroleum reserve management system definition from the defining and extensive glossary of the terms in our rules. Alright, and attempting consistent even to update with the definition and revive with the companies to look with the definitions that are commonly accepted in the oil and gas industry with the extent with the definitions are not inconsistent with other rules. Alphabetization of the section rule 4 through 10. And we're going to cut the tape there.